forcefully ejected and handcuffed from a DHS briefing today, an incident that has sparked outrage and concern across Washington and the country. He spoke briefly after leaving that building, but now is on MSNBC for his first exclusive question and answer interview. Jacob Soboroff, who's been covering the story for us, is with the senator. Jacob?
Ari, thank you very much. I'm joined right now by Senator Alex Padilla. Senator, thank you so much for joining us live on MSNBC. First question, how are you? We all watched the video. We saw you taken to the floor by those agents. How are you doing?
Yeah, look, I'm okay. I've been on the phone off and on with kids, right? Because my kids, travels fast in this day and age with technology to make sure they're okay. But I think most importantly is the outrage that I hope people feel. If this can happen to a United States senator for having the audacity to ask a question of the Secretary of Homeland Security, the same questions and requests for information that we've had, not just the last sort of week or so, the activity in Los Angeles, but since the beginning of the administration, then just imagine what can happen to anybody in the country, for that matter.
We heard from you briefly at the press conference after you came outside of the federal building in Westwood. We've heard more extensively from Secretary Noem and the Department of Homeland Security, and I want to just tell you a little bit, because I'm sure this has been a whirlwind, about what they've been saying. Secretary Noem said that you, quote, lunged towards her at this press conference. The Department of Homeland Security said the Secret Service believed that you were an attacker, and the Department of Homeland Security called this political theater. What's your response, and what's your version of what happened?
Well, first of all, that's ridiculous. It's a lie, but par for the course for this administration, right? So here's the stage. Look, I was in the federal building here in Los Angeles for a scheduled briefing. Just as one of my colleagues and I had to go all the way to Guantanamo Bay to begin to get information about that facility being used as a detention facility, they've been non-responsive to requests for information. And so I had scheduled, they approved, a briefing with representatives of the Northern Command in that federal building. We were there prior to the 10:30 original appointment date when we caught wind that Secretary of Homeland Security is going to be down the hall at a press conference. And our briefing was now delayed because of that press conference. So since the secretary has been non-responsive, I figured let me go over and listen to what she has to say. Maybe we can glean some information here.
So let me make sure I understand that. Go ahead.
So the whole time, right? We're the whole time being escorted in this federal building by somebody from the National Guard, somebody from the FBI. I've gone through screening. This is a federal building. And so tell them, let's go listen to the press conference. They escort me over to that room. And I'm sitting in the back of the room behind the cameras, behind the reporters, listening. And at one point, it was just too much to take. Not the first, but the second attack on the political leadership of California and this notion that Donald Trump and Kristi Noem had to come in and rescue the people of Los Angeles from Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass. It was too much. And so I spoke up. I introduced myself. And said I had a question. Look, they said I wasn't wearing my pin. My polo says United States Senate. There was no threat. There was no lunging. I raised my voice to ask a question, and it took, maybe half a second before multiple agents were on me.
The video clearly shows, and you can hear on the audio, that you identify yourself as Senator Padilla. She said you barged into the room, or you basically broke into the room. I'm paraphrasing here. Just set the record straight on that.
Yeah, I didn't barge into the room. As I mentioned, I was in a different conference room, a couple doors down the hall. I let it be known I'd like to go listen to the press conference. The folks that were escorting me in the building walked me over. I didn't even open the door. The door was open for me. And I spent a few minutes in the back of the room just listening in until the political rhetoric got to be too much to take. So I spoke up.
Have you seen the video yet? Well, you can look here, Senator. Have you actually watched it yourself? When you watch this, and let's go through this together. Describe to me what you're seeing. What's happening here?
Yeah, again, well, multiple people forcibly removing from the room. I know I was trying to do two things at once, try to get my question out while trying not to lose my balance. They first asked me to, get down on my knees. Like, growing up where I grew up, you know what happens if you don't obey law enforcement. And so I began to go on my knees to the extent that they would let me, because they were literally handling me at the same time. And it went from getting on their knees to flat on the floor, which I tried, but wasn't able to easily because of the folks handling me. They put handcuffs on me. So yes, I was handcuffed.
These are FBI agents. Did they tell you who they were?
They wouldn't identify themselves, and I kept repeatedly asking themselves, why am I being detained? No answer. Why am I being detained? No answer. Why am I being detained? No answer. Then they get me back up on my feet, and we start walking. Don't tell me where we're going.
You were handcuffed at this point.
Absolutely. Am I being led back outside? I don't know. Am I being taken to a cell? I don't know. They were not communicative until somebody from, I'm sure, Secretary Noem's team figured out I was who I said I was, and finally said, let him go.
And so they let you go. They took the handcuffs off. What happened next? There were reports that you met with Secretary Noem for 15 minutes after the press conference was over.
So this is a little surreal. So they took the handcuffs off. The person that came over said, well, if you'd like to meet with the secretary, you can do so after the press conference is over. Sure, I've been dying to get information from the department for months. I'll take this opportunity and see what I can glean. Then I was asked, but the other briefing that you're here for, the previously scheduled briefing, would you still like that briefing? Of course, that's why we came. That one never happened because the representatives from Northern Command left and again, didn't give us an excuse, so hoped for another opportunity to learn from them. Like, again, what's the mission of the National Guard here? What training have what's normally state National Guard is now federalized National Guard service women and men, if they're going to be out in communities, if they're going to be interfacing with civilians. This is not a normal job for them. And by the way, they're being taken away from other critical missions in the state of California to do this function. Now we hear the Marines are coming. For what purpose? What's the mission? What type of training preparation have they had?
Did you get answers to any of these questions?
None. And so, again, did have an opportunity to sit with the Secretary Noem for a few minutes. You know, you'd think she might have started the meeting with an apology of what happened. Of course not. And so I began to ask the question I was trying to ask in the press conference. For all the touting of the Trump administration of going after violent criminals, I told her, there's no disagreement there. If that's all you were doing, there would be no debate, there would be no discussion. But what's happening in reality is far different than that, because we hear story after story after story of non-violent migrants who, many are working in very essential jobs for our economy, being rounded up, right? The cruelty with which they're doing this, the increased cruelty with which they're doing this, escalating here in Los Angeles over the course of the last week. You don't need flashbangs, you know, when you're trying to target one person. National Guard over, not at the request of a governor. It hasn't happened since 1965. And so, of course, they're instigating, trying to create the response and a reaction from community, and we'll point to anything to further escalate the situation. It's wrong, and it's counterproductive.
Senator Padilla, we're here on my colleague Ari Melber's program, The Beat, on MSNBC, and I know Ari wants to ask you a question. Ari, go right ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob, and thanks to the Senator for joining us. You've now described the incident here for the first time. Do you view it as excessive force? As Jacob referenced, the administration is saying they were trying to basically do safety or security. Do you view it as excessive force or an effort to intimidate the opposition party?
Look, personally, I think it was excessive. I was in no way, lunging or threatening in any way. Again, consider where we were, in a secure federal building. I was being escorted. So definitely an overreaction, uncalled for, but it's not about me. Again, this is the biggest point. It's not about me. If they're willing to do this to me, a United States senator representing the state of California, just to imagine how it's going with their immigration enforcement on the streets when they show up at restaurants and are trying to detain a cook, or outside a Home Depot trying to detain a day laborer, or on the fields in Oxnard a couple of days ago detaining farm workers. You can just imagine. But that's a tone and approach that this administration has chosen to take. In many cases, I'm convinced it's unlawful and unconstitutional, and I have to do my job as a senator to insist on information and accountability and the rule of law.
And Senator, what do you think would be the right remedy then for this? We saw in the case of the mayor of Newark, who was, like you, sort of, as the one word used was manhandled. He was arrested. He was charged. You were not. But then they dropped the case. He's suing them, seeking redress. Do you see this incident as closed, or do you think there is something more they must do to properly respect the co-equal branch of government at a time where the expansive use of federal forces from the National Guard to the Marines is also, beyond you, a big question? Do you think that more must be done, more accountability for the Trump administration for what happened today?
Look, again, it's not about me. I'm still processing what happened to me. But to the extent that we have shed more light on what they're doing and how they're doing it, the public deserves to be aware. To suggest that they have to come into Los Angeles to restore order. Look, Jacob, you know Los Angeles. It's a big, spread out city. The images that we've seen over the course of the last week of some vandalism, some violence, et cetera, that's wrong, and I denounce it. But it's very small and very contained in a big metropolis of the Los Angeles area. So the National Guard was not necessary, but folks have responded to that. It's the Trump administration continuing to escalate. A couple of days ago, he's saying that things are